Do you ever get the feeling that you feel like you're doing the right thing, but you still can't see how God will actually provide in your life? And something I want to pay attention to is how providence actually works through ordinary means, ordinary kindness, before it can actually be seen through obvious miracles. And this is actually what we're going to see in Ruth chapter 2. We're going to unpack Ruth gleaning in Boaz's field, the first encounter between them, and how hidden faithfulness actually becomes a visible provision. And I'll give you one immediate action to help you notice where God is already providing through everyday grace in this episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help build your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to rate the show and follow. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's get a little bit of context into the chapter. So Ruth chapter 2 takes place during the barley harvest and introduces Boaz, who is a wealthy relative of Elimelech, who notices Ruth gleaning in his field. And he actually protects her, provides generously for her, and explains that he has heard of her loyalty to Naomi and to the Lord. And the chapter actually shows how God begins to answer emptiness, not through some crazy miracle, but through one man's kindness and one woman's courage. So the story again is moving from grief to provision, and we're showing something here that we should always have hope even when we're trying to survive. Okay, let's read verses 1 to 3. The focus here is going to be Ruth going out to glean. And my question to you is, why does the chapter actually stress the ordinary chance of this encounter and also shows God's providence through it all? Verse 1, Now Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a prominent rich man of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain, behind someone in whose sight I may find favor. She said to her, Go, my daughter. So she went. She came and gleaned in the field behind the reapers. As it happened, she came to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. In verse 3, we see that the text shows that it was by chance. As it happened, she came to the part of the field belonging to Boaz. I think this is interesting because the story sort of wants you to feel that from Ruth's perspective, she's simply going out to survive. But from our perspective, we know that God is actually already guiding her steps. So the narrative hides God's providence, even though this is an ordinary movement. The reason why I'm saying this is because in our everyday life, there may be things that you experience that seem so mundane and boring, and just the monotonous nature of life can feel like, hey, I don't think God is really working. What God is working right now when I'm doing my assignment, or when I'm going on a run, or when I'm just sleeping or anything like that. But I think it's important to recognize something that is critical, in that God works in ordinary movement. God works in ordinary circumstances. And Ruth is not looking for some miracle. She's just doing the next faithful thing. So again, working through ordinary decisions, that is how God can actually enact his greater purposes. Okay, now let's read verses 4 to 7. The focus here is going to be Boaz noticing Ruth and asking about her. And my question to you is, why does a powerful man pay attention to a poor foreign widow? Verse 4, Just then Boaz came from Bethlehem. He said to the reapers, The Lord be with you. They answered, The Lord bless you. Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, To whom does this young woman belong? The young man who was in charge of the reapers answered, She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers. So she came, and she has been on her feet from early this morning until now without even resting for a moment. Okay, so why does Boaz even notice her at all? Because Boaz is the kind of man who sees these sorts of things. He greets his workers first with the blessing, right? We saw that, the Lord be with you, and they answered, the Lord bless you. And his attentions turn toward the woman who's in his field, okay? And it shows something, that attention is really important. It's not blind, right? It shows that he looks on everyone, and he does not pass over people who may be poor or someone who's in his field or anything like that. A person who is indifferent perhaps would not even notice Ruth. But Ruth is described very carefully to Boaz. What's interesting is the way she is described. She apparently has been on her feet from early this morning until now without even resting for a moment, right? And what's interesting is this is a quiet testimony, right? Because she has a reputation now, and that reputation is diligence, right? Hard work, respect. She's making sure that she's doing her job to the best of her abilities. And this is important because sometimes that can be the best testimony. The fact that you work diligently so hard because you're working for the Lord. You do all of these things because you're working for the Lord. You pray so hard because you're ultimately finding your meaning, purpose, and value in the Lord. And that is the most important thing. Alright, so let's read verses 8 to 16 now. The focus here is going to be Boaz protecting, feeding, and blessing Ruth. And my question to you is, what does true generosity look like when it has power to ignore or exploit? Verse 8. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Keep your eyes on the field that is being reaped, and follow behind them. I have ordered the young men not to bother you. If you get thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn." Then she fell prostrate with her face to the ground and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your sight, that you should take notice of me when I am a foreigner?" But Boaz answered her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told me, how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. May the Lord reward you for your deeds, and may you have a full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." Then she said, "May I continue to find favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, even though I am not one of your servants." At mealtime Boaz said to her, "Come here and eat some of this bread and dip your morsel in the sour wine." So she sat behind the reapers, and he heaped up for her some parched grain. She ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she got up to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, "Let her glean even among the standing sheaves, and do not reproach her. You must also pull out some handfuls for her from the bundles, and leave them for her to glean, and do not rebuke her." Alright, what did we see here? Boaz actually speaks very kindly and specifically to Ruth, right? So he is powerful, right? There is a power dynamic going on here. He is far more, he has a lot more authority than Ruth, and yet he combines his power with tenderness. He tells her, don't go to another field. He actually offers her safety amongst his workers and instructs his workers not to touch her or shame her. And this is actually what righteous power is all about. It's actually protecting rather than exploiting, and that's what I talked about at the beginning of the chapter. What's more is that Boaz blesses Ruth, right? Because he notices something, that her loyalty to Naomi is really loyalty to the Lord. Okay, he prays that she may be rewarded by the God under whose wings she has come to take refuge. So it's again showing something, that believing in God requires radical trust, radical belief in something that you may not be able to see right now, but God has a purpose, plan, and intention for your life. Okay, let's read verses 17 to 23. The focus here is going to be Ruth returning to Naomi with grain and news of Boaz. My question to you is, why does Naomi's bitterness start to soften so quickly here? Verse 17. So she gleaned in the field until evening, then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. She picked it up and came into the town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gleaned. Then she took out and gave her what was left over, after she herself had been satisfied. Her mother-in-law said to her, "Where did you glean today, and where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, saying, "The name of the man with whom I worked today is Boaz." And then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "Blessed be he by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." Naomi also said to her, "The man is a relative of ours, one of our nearest kin." Then Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay close by my young men, until they have finished all my harvest.'" Naomi said to Ruth her daughter-in-law, "It is better, my daughter, that you go out with his young women. Otherwise someone might bother you in another field." So she stayed close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvests, and she lived with her mother-in-law. So what do we see here? Naomi's tone actually begins to change. And the reason why is because the bread is arriving before the whole story is solved. Ruth comes home, and she comes home with an abundant amount of grain, and Naomi begins to ask, well, who has given you so much food? But the gift is not only food, right? It's a sign that God is already at work in the field, and that's something that's important as well. And Boaz's name is quite important to Naomi, as we saw, because she begins to realize now that Ruth's accident is actually not an accident at all, because there is a possibility of something. And God's care is visible often through the right person at the right time. That is often how God's providence works. And we end with the barley and the wheat harvests in Ruth chapter 2 because the story is actually stretching forward in that Ruth 2 is not the end of hunger, but it is the start of something different, a sustained provision on the God of Israel, right? The harvest season actually tells you that God's care is not one-off, but it's going to continue, and it's going to keep continuing because of her trust in the Lord. Okay, let's see how this chapter fulfills Jesus Christ. Okay, so Ruth chapter 2 shows providence, protection, and welcome arriving through the kindness of one man. His name is Boaz. In Christ, we have these themes deepening and widening because Jesus, obviously, is the true Redeemer who always notices the outsider, the foreigner, the stranger. He feeds the hungry. He's going to gather all the vulnerable under his personal care. And Boaz's field is actually a picture of the kingdom, where the poor are not merely given scraps but are brought near and blessed. We remember, especially in the Sermon on the Mount, in the Beatitudes, who is blessed in the kingdom of heaven. We also read in Galatians chapter 6 verse 2 to bear one another's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. That is to say, the chapter is highlighting something: Ruth's diligent labor to support her mother-in-law and Boaz's radical generosity in providing and protecting for the vulnerable. Selfless love and charity. Okay, how can we apply this chapter in our everyday life? I think the most important things to recognize are the ordinary means of God's providence, right? So there are going to be ordinary things in your life that are building towards something greater. Now, obviously, the reason why we call them ordinary is because we can't really see, right? We can't really see whether or not they're a part of God's plan because we don't know God's plan. But we need to believe, recognize, there are going to be situations in our life. Maybe we're studying. Maybe we're working diligently at our job. Maybe we are reading something. I don't know. It all comes down to one really critical idea, and that is God works in ordinary means. And if that is true, we need to have a lot of reverence for the ordinary parts of our life as well. Alright, so that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. We learnt in this episode that Ruth's chance visit to Boaz's field is actually hidden providence. Boaz notices Ruth because righteous authority pays attention to the vulnerable, that gleaning becomes a living form of mercy and provision, that Boaz's kindness points forward and towards the possibility of family redemption, and that the chapter actually shifts the story from famine to hope through ordinary generosity. In the next episode, we're going to move from the field to the threshing floor in Ruth chapter 3. We're going to unpack Naomi's plan, Ruth's bold quest, and what it means to ask for redemption with courage and purity. You don't want to miss it. So that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to rate the show and follow. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.